So, passing over for the opening statements, which obviously you can pre-prepare, and a lot of it always about sort of policies and whatnot, but I also would challenge you, please, to include somewhere in your opening 2-minute statement what makes you the best candidate for this job. Why do you want this job? Because I would know this job. So I'm really interested to know why anyone would put themselves up as a candidate for election to Westminster. I am going to use Chair's privilege to start at this end with Phil, and then I'll sort of mix it up as we answer the questions going forward. If at any point you feel that I haven't come to you or something and you want to say, please do catch my eye, and I will invite you to comment at that point. I will also try and come back to the audience where possible for reflections on the answer or non-answer that you have received. So, first of all, let's give them a round of applause for turning up. Colin, your 2-minute introduction, please.
Thank you very much, Julia. I'm Colin Fox. I'm the Scottish Socialist Party's candidate in this election. And I wanted to say, if the polls are accurate, and I believe they are, Scotland's about to topple the one-party state that's ruled here for the past 50 years. This is what regime change looks like. This is a political and a democratic revolution, and that's what we're part of today. Because the socially conservative Labour Party is about to suffer the worst defeat it's had, and only the most hackneyed Blairite in the country will mourn its passing. That's the central story of this general election here. It's exciting, it's historic, and isn't it in such contrast to the picture at Westminster, where there's a stalemate between a government that doesn't deserve to be re-elected, governing as it has for the past 5 years on behalf of a corporate elite who think they're omnipotent and untouchable, and an opposition so bereft of ideas all they can do is ape the reactionary policies of the government on austerity, on blaming immigrants and claimants for a crisis that has nothing to do with them. That's the context of this election, and the reality for the millions of people across Britain is the majority of Britain's population have suffered a fall in their standard of living these last 5 years. That's what's important to them. This election is about poverty wages in Edinburgh South and the rest of the country, about zero-hour contracts, about the shortage of affordable socially rented housing in this country. These are the most important things in this election, and I want to be elected to Parliament to represent them and not the corporate elite who are currently in the grip of Westminster. Thank you.
I've grown up witnessing my family having problems with the criminal justice system for as long as I can actually remember. And I'd like to pose to you a question that I never hear being talked about in these discussions, which is, what would you do about prison reform, or what would you do anything?
I understand what you said about the apology, and obviously most people appreciate that, etc. I just wonder, I voted no in September, and I wondered how you'd feel about representing me at Westminster. Given that I don't know if you still feel the same way about me, and the other 55%, or whether you've changed your views about that. I don't know whether you would be happy representing me in my views at Westminster.
Could you explain how you could support the Tory party's 30 billion welfare cuts? The mansion tax, how much in the context of money will it provide? How will your party identify which pensioners should lose their winter allowance and free TV, and who should get it like? So is it a bureaucratic introduction you'd be making? So there are 3 questions I'd like you to answer.
Okay. So we've got a question about prison reform, we've got a question about taxation, and then we've got a question which I'm going to broaden out a wee bit, because I think it's actually really important when you think about democracy, that once you've elected your MP, it isn't about whether you elected them or not. It isn't even about if you turned up at the ballot box or not. They still represent you. They are your man or woman at Westminster. So just making sure that you behave in that way, I suppose, once you're elected, please. On tax, prison reform, and how you represent all your constituents. But obviously, as an ex-Lothians MSP, you probably had quite a hard job.
Yeah, if I can say on prisons reform first, I sat on the Justice Committee in the Scottish Parliament for 4 years, so the thing that struck me, I went to visit every prison in Scotland, and we've got far too many. We have far too many prisons. We have far too many people in prisons. As a society, Juliet, we jail far, far too many people. One of the worst rates in the whole of Europe, and it's not something to be proud of, because prisons, unlike Norman Tebbit and Thatcher, prisons don't work. They don't work because the alternatives to prison have a better rate of stopping people from reoffending, and we have to bite in the bullet in this country. Scotland's got a bit of a, Jekyll and Hyde attitude towards justice. We look towards Scandinavia but refuse to implement the progressive ideas that they use, and we think we can jail more and more people and it'll solve the problem, and it won't. I went to Low Moss prison, Juliet, but I just say this, and I met prison officers who telling me there's young men from Wester Hailes, from Pilton, from areas of Glasgow, Lochee and Dundee, who are doing life sentences in instalments. They're going to jail for a year, they get no help, they go back into the area they came from, no work, no help with a relationship, no house, back into the prison for another year, back out again, back in. That's a cycle of despair that's a failing for all of us. So we have a great deal to do, and I look towards Scandinavia, which got some important lessons for us to learn. Stop sending people to jail and address their fundamental problems, which are usually illiteracy, lack of education, lack of housing, lack of self-confidence, and lack of ability to make a way in the world for themselves. That's the fundamental thing. And I suspect that's probably... I would only say this on the issue, the tweets that Neil mentioned there and that Ian's referred to. I have to be honest with you and say to you that there are far, far more important things in this constituency that are exercising people than whether Neil made a mistake in tweets. He's apologised for it. I think we should welcome it. I'm disappointed. Ian said there, if I pick you up wrong, I'm perfectly happy to allow you to correct yourself. But when you said his apology is unacceptable, well, that doesn't...
I said it was acceptable.
Well, that's good. Then well done to you. Because I think if we don't allow people to say, I made a mistake, and apologise, where do we go with it? Are they going to hold that over them forever? I congratulate Ian for saying that he accepts Neil's apologies. Neil's apologised. He made a mistake. I think we all recognise. We've been there. We're human. We move on to issues like 0 hours contracts, poverty wages, the lack of housing, and the need to address, in Edinburgh South, one of the most socially divided constituencies in this entire country of ours. On the BBC website, Juliet, I don't know if you did this, I did this, I checked to see I was actually standing. Because the BBC didn't have me doing standing. So I checked to see I was standing, and there's this nice wee exercise on the BBC website. You can guess how many people in Edinburgh South have had a degree, how many people in Edinburgh South, what their average working wages if they're in full-time employment. So I did it and I guessed, and I was miles out, because the average wage, full-time, people employed full-time in Edinburgh South is £685 a week. And I think, I live in the inch. I've been canvassing in Morden, Birdie House, Gilmerton, Gracemount, Fernieside, Ferniebank. I don't know anybody who gets £685 a week. And if that's the average, then somebody else in this constituency is earning a fortune. And we know that to be the case, and we've got to address it. And it brings me to this point, Juliet, the third of the questions that's asked about austerity. It's the biggest con facing us here. It's the biggest fraud that we face in this election. The government comes along and they say the country is indebted at record levels of indebtedness, and we're going to solve it by introducing the bedroom tax. We're going to solve it by taking away rights from claimants. We're going to solve it by taking away rights from immigrants who come to this country. In other words, we're going to call the victims to account for a crisis that was caused by the City of London and those who wrote up the debts. I'm not in favour of austerity. I'm against all the cuts. We've had 14% cut in public services since 2010. I'm not for having any more. Our public services are not good enough at the moment. They need to be improved. They need to be far better. And we're not going to solve the problem by making further cuts. And it reminds me, Juliet, of the 1930s in America, where Hoover, the president, the country was in depression, and Hoover argued that we needed to tighten our belts and make further cuts. And a wise counsellor, Franklin D. Roosevelt, who was elected, said, no, We have to grow the economy, we have to invest in a new deal, and we have to grow ourselves out of austerity and deal with our debts in that way. That's what I agree with.
I think Colin touched on a really important point when you were making the link, Colin, between education and income in this constituency. I think as a country, both at UK and within Scotland, we have to do much more to get kids from vulnerable backgrounds, from poorer backgrounds like Wester Hales, which we mentioned twice already tonight, into universities, because that's how we reduce inequality, not just by increasing the minimum wage or higher benefits for people. It's about educating people. If you look at the situation in Scotland, I work in a university here in Edinburgh.
Do we have a question?
It's coming.
I'm timing you as well, by the way, now.
I work in a university here in Edinburgh. The grant for the poorest students in Scotland has been cut over the last few years under the SNP government to now it's one of the lowest in Western Europe. And this means that the rate at which poor kids in Scotland are going to university is falling behind the rest of the UK. So my question would be, what policies do the panel have to try and improve the amount of kids from poor backgrounds going to our universities? I mean, my view is increasing this grant beyond the £1,750 per year as it is just now under the SNP to something reasonable is key. I went to university under Thatcher and my grant was far higher than that. That's the end of my question.
Just for anyone who doesn't know, non-binary means people who don't fall into the category of male or female, and this includes people who don't identify as a gendered person at all. So yeah, that's my question. What if you already support it? Like I know two of the candidates do. Why? Maybe talk about why that's important. And if you already support the non-binary pledge, maybe talk about why you've supported it and why it's important. And if you haven't, maybe talk about why, or like if you want to or something. Okay.
Hiya. I'd just like to ask a quick question, if that's okay. How would you help local schools in this area?
Yeah, first of all, can I say to the question about binary identity, I really don't have much more to add that Phil and Pramod have added. I agree with what they've said. The only things I would add possibly to that was that I take the approach that you have equality, it's 100% or it's not. If you don't have 100% equality, that's discrimination. And I think until we have equality for everyone, then we're accepting that some people are entitled to be discriminated against, and I reject that entirely. And the other thing I'd like to do, probably on behalf of us all, I want to pay tribute to you and the people who campaign on this. It's the same as, I was approached, my colleagues probably were, people campaigning same-sex marriages, etc. It takes campaigners to do it, to raise issues and to press and insist in their human right to equality. That's a really important role that we have in society. And I'm only reminded of it because it's not a cheap point. I don't consider myself a politician, I never have. And maybe people looking at my record would say there's the evidence. I'm not a politician, I'm a political activist. I've been a political activist for 35 years. I happen to think, rightly or wrongly, political activists are highly regarded in our society. Politicians, that's another matter. You might see that's why I make the distinction. But on the issue of education, my starting point for these discussions in education is the late, great John Maclean. The leader of the Red Clydesiders in the 1920s made a perfectly sincere, and it seems to me factual statement, that access to education is a human right and not a monetary privilege. And I have to say that those people who voted for tuition fees, I don't really care whether they were £1 or £1 million, betrayed that principle. Once you start insisting that people have to pay for something that is their human right, inalienable human right, then you inevitably start excluding some who can't afford to pay and only including others. And I have to say, here we are, we're at Edinburgh University, so let's not ignore the moustache under our nose. This university has not got a good record in encouraging working class kids from this city or anywhere else to come here. And I can assume, Juliet, that the Vice-Chancellor's got the room bugged, so that'll get back to you by Monday. The fact is, it's not good enough. I stood twice for the rector of St Andrews University, and I'll not tell you the result, I'll just happily say I wasn't last on each occasion. But St Andrews University is an absolutely shocking and disgusting record. Youngsters coming from this city and the whole of Scotland and Britain going to St Andrews University from a working class background is in the low single figures. It's the same at Oxford and Cambridge. And I'm a socialist. I don't accept for a second that the middle class, the people with money, are the brainy people in this country. We are prevented from getting to these august universities and institutions because we don't have the financial wherewithal to do it. It's not good enough. It has to be changed. And I sat in the Scottish Parliament along with MPs, MSPs, I beg your pardon, who went to university, who, like me, got a free university education. We got a grant to go there. We get housing benefit. We're encouraged to get a job with the Royal Mail at Christmas. And they kicked the ladder away when they were in there and they got the benefit themselves. Shame on every last one of them. I was in Orkney. And to move on to that point about local schools, I have to say, I'm delighted that Edinburgh South has got some of the best schools in the country. I'm also disgusted it's got some of the poorest. And I don't want to make a cheap point here, right, but we have to learn some things. We send working class kids to schools that are not in a proper condition and are dilapidated. We are sending a signal to them that they are not worth anything better. There was a youngster at Liberton High School killed because a wall fell on her. I'm not going into the details. I don't want to use it as a political point. But that wall was dilapidated. I've been in that gym. I didn't expect it to fall down. I'm not suggesting, not holding any responsible here. But it sends a signal when you get into that school. Too much needs to be done. And frankly, it's a bureaucratic insult to say that that school doesn't fall within categories that some pen pusher at the City Chambers or the Scottish Parliament says doesn't qualify for it. My kids go there. I see it needs investment. I demand it gets investment. I demand at this election that Liberton High School is amongst one of the best schools in this constituency as soon as possible.
Before I go to the next round of questions, I'm just going to do a really quick fire round for some of the questions that were submitted and some of the questions that have come in from the live feed on the internet. I am literally looking for, like, practically one-word answers, okay? It's a challenge, isn't it? So, first of all, and we'll just start from Phil and go to Colin and then back the way. So, are we too reliant on oil to fund our economy?
No, we're not too reliant on oil. I mean, I think the point has to be made about Scotland's economy. We had this a little bit with the referendum debate. Oil is a part of Scotland's wealth. It's a part of our economy. But with prices falling, are we still too reliant on it? Well, that was in the question, that's not just me. But what's not in the question is we need it publicly owned. We need to own our oil. Like so many countries. Okay. Right.
Do you plan on increasing public investment and stimulus? And how can we best prepare for the next financial crisis?
The phone hacking scandal proved the importance of holding media owners to account and of not letting individuals like Rupert Murdoch abuse their power. Do you support tighter rules on media ownership, and do you support the full implementation of the Leveson report? In addition, do you feel it's immoral to accept donations from discredited business leaders while claiming to represent a move towards a more socially just society?
Is the SNP right in saying that the Labour Party's plans for spending in the next 5 years are really just a form of austerity light, and their own plans would involve, the SNP's plans involve spending a great deal more money on public services? Or is the Institute of Fiscal Studies right in what they said yesterday, which is there is a discrepancy between what the SNP is saying and what the Institute has seen in the SNP's manifesto figures, and their conclusion is the SNP's spending plans for the next 5 years are really very similar to the Labour Party's.
This is a question for most of the candidates except the Greens, because I think the citizens' income policy is one of the most progressive and future-thinking policies we've got. But for the others, I just want to ask, if a minimum wage is not a living wage, why do you support it?
Colin.
Thank you, Juliet. I think, first of all, I'm bound to say I don't think the IFS are the oracle. So... Who do you believe? But nonetheless, like the gentleman, I was interested that the conclusion they drew yesterday that was that the Labour Party, and I hope you follow this, the Labour Party, who's trying to be very austere, weren't anywhere near as austere as they claimed. And the SNP, who were claiming that they weren't for austere, were rather more austere than they claimed. That's what they seem to be suggesting. I can only say from afar that since the IFS have had nothing whatever to say of the Scottish Socialist Party's manifesto commitments, I take it we're bang on the money. I would like to add, though, that the young gentleman's question, if I can make that difference without offending anybody here, who asked about, are we in a process of repeating the same mistakes? I think that's a profoundly important question, because the Conservative Liberal Democrat government going about how growth in the economy, interest rates at zero, inflation's at zero, we're on the road to heaven, chocolate and ice cream all round, and all the evidence shows that we're doing exactly the same thing that led to 2008 in the first place. It's a financial bubble, housing bubble, primarily in the southeast of England, but not entirely, a credit bubble. The City of London will lead us to nirvana. The same garbage, the same mistakes, the same errors they made the last time. And I think that's probably what's behind your question. There's a widespread fear here, isn't there? We're heading for exactly the same place, because the people in charge haven't a clue what they're doing, they're not serving the interests of the majority, and they'll send us onto the rocks again. And I have to say that I don't have any truck with these people. I never thought they were right the first time. And we have a system, it's called capitalism. I'm sorry to bring you that word on a Friday night, I know you'd rather avoid it, but it's true. We have a system of capitalism that's based in exploitation, and the City of London exploits the whole world. They take profits out of countries and they bring it to London, and it goes into the southeast in the overheated economy. I reject that model of economics and society as a whole, and we're capable of far better. On the other thing, so the woman, you referred to the woman with the grey hair, the woman with the dragon tattoo, and the Scottish Socialist Party. I bring you the information. The Scottish Socialist Party also in favour of a citizen's income, but rather than elaborating something you clearly know about, I want to enlighten you that the Scottish Socialist Party's election campaign is centred on a £10 an hour living wage. I've been in Princess Street today for 2 hours. People say to me, "Where have you been? Where have you been?" I says, "I was in Gilberton." "What a tan you got." So I campaign in Princess Street, I'm sure you've met us. We campaign on a £10 an hour living wage in Edinburgh for two reasons. First of all, Edinburgh is a city increasingly built on poverty wages. The whole length of Princess Street, go in any of these shops in retail, the wages are poverty, national minimum wage wages are £6.50 an hour. You're not going to raise a family in this city on £6.50 an hour. You're not going to pay your own way. The government says you need to be earning £10 an hour. That's why we chose the £10 an hour. Because when you earn £10 an hour, then you stop qualifying for top-up benefits. You stop qualifying for housing benefit. You stop qualifying for tax credits. In other words, you pay your own way. So we're in this crazy world where we're subsidising, us here, taxpayers across the country, we're subsidising Jenners to pay their staff £6.50 an hour, and we give them the other £3.50. Apple Mac, Debenhams, Burger King, you name it, they're all at it. It's an absolute outrage. And to me, this is the centrepiece. We're building an economy on that, treating people like second-class citizens who simply cannot survive. And this is the second richest city in Britain. As Phil rightly said, this isn't a debate that we don't have the money. The money is everywhere in this city. So somebody earning £685 in Edinburgh South, as I mentioned before, that's no £6.50 an hour, is it? That's what we've got to address. And I have to say, I'm a bit sick of listening to Ed Miliband and Jim Murphy last night. Maybe Ian will do it too. He's got a chance to avoid it now that I'm going to highlight it before he speaks. Because the Labour Party talks about how they're going to ban exploitative zero-hour contracts. Well, I bring you the news. All zero-hour contracts are exploitative. We don't just want one of the exploitative ones. We need to get rid of them all, comrades. And finally, on reticence, it was asked about the press inquiry, and I suspect we're all going to agree on this. The conduct, the tabloid press in Britain in recent years has been nothing short of an absolute scandal and an outrage. We talk about a free press in this country. which has been a cover for conduct which is absolutely outrageous to victims like Millie and others, people who've been treated so shabbily, had no recourse to justice. And I hope that Leveson, I don't think Lord Leveson, I don't put much faith in any Lord, but Lord Leveson, I hope he comes forward and he says, I'm in favour of a free press, but we need a free press, not one that's controlled by billionaires like Rupert Murdoch, who can send these journalists in. You either get the sack or you go and doorstep people who've just lost a loved one. You tap phones, you do behaviour that's criminal.
Okay.
And if he doesn't come out with stronger regulations and allows the press to police themselves, then it's another whitewash, I'm sorry to say.
Okay. And on that note, I'm going to invite them all to say just a 2-minute summary. So basically, why you think the people in this room should vote for you. Colin.
Thank you very much, Juliet. First thing I'd like to say is that I think this is a absolutely historic general election. 2015 will be one of the ones you remember all your life, like 1945. But I wasn't there, but somebody told me about it. It'll be remembered because it's a game changer. This is a game changer election, and it's a game changer election in Scotland because, in my view, we should celebrate the end of an era. The end of an era. The end of a Labour Party, one-party state that's been socially conservative, politically reactionary, and has in recent years simply aped Mrs Thatcher. It's done what Thatcher did in privatisation. It did what Thatcher did in attacking the trade union movement. It did what Thatcher did in attacking working class people. And my message to you is vote for good riddance to bad rubbish. My message is... However, and there's always a however, and the however is that, of course, May the 8th will follow May the 7th as usual this year. And in May the 8th, we will still have 0-hour contracts, we will still have poverty wages, we will still have an inadequate number of housing, affordable and socially rented accommodation. All those priorities remain to be addressed, and we fundamentally have to make sure that those people who get elected, who made promises, must be kept to account. They must keep their promises, because if they don't, we've seen in recent times what happens to political parties like Pramods when they don't keep their promises. Their support goes off a cliff. So you have to make sure you're democratically elected on a programme. You must ensure that you keep to it. And my last word, Juliet, since we're in the august surroundings of Edinburgh University, you think I'm backtracking for the Chancellor here, don't you, because I slagged him earlier on. But I'm reminded that Malcolm X, the great black American civil rights leader, went to Harvard University and he explained that you can't have capitalism without racism. And you can't have capitalism without exploitation. You can't have capitalism without inequality. You can't have capitalism without warmongering. And so my message to you as the Scottish Socialist Party's candidate is that be brave. Stand up in the polling station. Do the right thing. Vote for change. Transformational change. This is a transformational election. Vote for the Scottish Socialist Party and vote for Colin Fox on the May the 7th.